Okay, so at this point we have to start planning out a couple of things about our game. More specifically, the different states that our game can be in. A game state is basically just saying what our game is primarily doing at the moment. So one example of this might be starting. If the game is starting, that means that the player is starting off in its beginning position and is not quite moving yet. If the game is playing or running, then the car is in motion and all of the physics and all of the interactions that could be happening to that car are currently being taken account for. Another example might be if you cross the finish line. At that time, you have finished the game, so the game state will be finished. So let's count out what we kind of want here. So we've already covered the game is starting, and in this case, the car will be sitting there at the beginning of the map, not really moving. The next will be if it is running. So if the game is running, the car will be moving forward and having physics applied to it, and any other fancy things that we have going on inside the game will start kind of activating. We also want to have a state that can handle if the car crashes. So if our car hits a barrier before it makes it to the finish line, this state will become active and it'll probably stop our car and maybe reset the game. Finally, we want to have a game finished. This would be an event that triggers every single time that a player has crossed the finish line. Now, there are definitely other game states that we could have, such as pause, God mode, anything really that we would want, but let's start off with these just for now. All right, let's get into it. So let's start by coding in our game states that we want. So I'll go up inside my class. So I'll be making a state that will be accessible and visible to every single function within my player controller. So how we structure a thing like a player state is by creating what's called an enum. An enum looks a bit like this. So an enum is short for enumeration, which means it's a specific list of things. So in here we can list a lot of specific things like our states of our game. So let's start by giving it a name. So instead of enum, I'm going to call it game states, the capital S. And in here, I'm going to start listing out my game states. So we had starting, we had running, we had crashed, and we had finished. And notice that I'm using a comma to separate each one of these. And that's all we need. So this lists all of the states it can have. Now let's have a variable that can tell us exactly what our current state is. So in here we'll make a private game states current state. And when the game starts and our debug log says the game is started, let's make that true. Current state equals game states dot starting. And now we have a variable that holds a very easy to read description of what state our game is currently in. Now you could just use like a number variable, right? You could use an integer and say that the game state is currently 1, which means that it's starting, or it's 2, which means it's running. But using an enumeration like this kind of makes it so that it's easy to follow and track in your game, and that way if you ever have to add or delete game states or any other thing that you would use an enum for, it makes it really easy to track. And then you won't get super confused about what number means what. Next, let's program what a starting state actually looks like.